Says Michael Popok, Legal AF. Peter Navarro is not content with being convicted for contempt of Congress and awaiting sentencing in January. Now he's decided that he wants to go to jail because now he's tweeting and putting on social media racist, misogynist, and sexist rants against people like Cassidy Hutchinson, who had the courage, being the former right-hand person to Mark Meadows, who had the courage as a witness to history and a witness for the prosecution to fire her lawyer, who was a Trump-appointed lawyer and paid for lawyer, testified truthfully to the Jan 6 committee about everything that happened in the White House, including with Mark Meadows, the Secret Service, Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and others. She now is fully cooperating with both Jack Smith, the special prosecutor for the federal government, and Fani Willis in Georgia, and has written a book called Enough, in which, for good measure, she also says that Rudy Giuliani sexually assaulted her on Jan 6th, awaiting the speech. The speech is by Donald Trump. But to Peter Navarro, who's not contrite at all, having been convicted of his crimes, awaiting sentencing, he says, and I quote, now listen to this combination of misogyny, racism, and sexism all rolled into one by Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro, who was not a lawyer, who was at best an economist, a trade advisor, who somehow decided he was a constitutional and electoral scholar, and working with Steve Bannon, and then working with Ken Chesborough and John Eastman, developed the fake elector Green Bay sweep, they called it, to create a group of fake electors to compete with the real electors to pressure Mike Pence to turn the election from Biden to Trump. That Peter Navarro. And yet he didn't have the brass or the you-know-what, the balls, to testify to Congress or work out any deal with Congress. Look, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone worked out a deal with the Jan 6 committee and avoided being prosecuted and convicted of contempt. But now we've got Peter Navarro, who said in a social media tweet, referring to Cassidy Hutchinson and others as pimps, book pimps. And this is how he frames it. Listen to this. Why would White House men, in parentheses, just in case you missed his point, his sexist point, Prez, VP, senior advisor, ever hire a woman who, after what these book pimps, and then he lists, including Cassidy Hutchinson, are out there throwing mud at Trump and Giuliani? Let's unpack this for a minute as we get into the mind and the psychosis of Peter Navarro. In his world, only men occupy senior positions of power in our federal government, including the vice president and the president. That's his caveman approach. Go look at the current occupant of the vice president seat if you want to see a different world that we actually live in. That is reality. And so those men who will always, in Peter Navarro's warped view, at least at the Republican side, MAGA side, always occupy the leading positions in the White House. Why would they ever hire women, those bad women who have pimped themselves out to try to sell a book? He goes on later in another social media post, in case we missed his point, to say that pimp ladies be given real MAGA women a bad name. Let's unpack that for a moment. Suddenly he's adopting some sort of syntax for what he thinks is, I don't know, people are brown and black people. Now he's be given. So now he's co-opting another group's race or cultural being and authenticity in the way he speaks. And he calls them pimp ladies as if it's some sort of, I mean, how old is this guy, by the way? He is 74 years old. I get it. Or yeah, okay. So you got that problem. And then he goes on, for good measure, remember, or if you don't know, Cassidy Hutchinson has a new book out called, a memoir called Enough, in which she talks about being a Trump supporter in the beginning and how, having watched what happened on Jan 6th and then the pressure campaign on her to tell lies to the Jan 6 committee and ultimately to prosecutors, in which Donald Trump, in her testimony, tried to bribe her with a job after he left office and she was about to testify to the Jan 6 committee, that he, Donald Trump, had his Save America PAC pay $4 million to Red Curve Consulting just to create a job for Cassidy Hutchinson that they could offer her. So he basically paid for the job to bribe her not to testify right before she was about to testify. And then in her own testimony, her Trump bought and paid for a lawyer told Cassidy Hutchinson not to tell the truth. When she said she remembered a number of instances, she's 26 years old. She's with it. She's happening. She's, on the ball. But when the lawyer said, why don't you not remember that? She, after consulting with her soul and her conscience and her parents and her church, decided not to do that and fired that lawyer, told the truth to the Jan 6 committee, and as I said, is now a witness for the prosecution for both Jack Smith and Fani Willis. And now claims in her memoir that Rudy Giuliani, had his hands all over her and sexually attacked her under the leering gaze of John Eastman. So Peter Navarro, knowing that, because it's been in the paper now for a few days about the memoir that's about to come out, he used sort of a sexist, sexual, undertoned comment about her. He said in another social media post, again, after his conviction and before his sentencing hearing is coming up, he said, and I quote, "I watched Cassidy Hutchinson sucking candy, in the West Wing and not doing a darn thing." And then he put in there, for good measure, Rudy hero, Cassidy trash. I mean, just to watch a 74-year-old white elite guy, right, who's never had to work a day in his life, go after a young woman who is a witness to history and a witness now for the prosecution and make sexual comments about her. I mean, have you ever seen, I defy anyone to find for me, you can go Google it, in literature or in reporting, somebody saying about a man that he was just there sucking candy and all of that imagery? Why don't you just come out and say what you wanted to say, Peter? If you're such a big, tough guy, why don't you just say it? Say what you wanted to say about the MAGA men and the women you want to have them be subservient under them, including for sexual favors, apparently. I mean, is this like the long lost episode of The Handmaid's Tale? I mean, truth is stranger than fiction and more disgusting. And what I want to bring home now is a couple of missing parts of his attack. Somebody he didn't mention, interesting, and the fact that he's now, I think, screwed himself appropriately, proper use of that term, before his sentencing in January before Judge Maida. Let me take the missing person first, and I'm going to do a separate hot take on this person. Molly Michaels. Molly Michaels is the bookend to Cassidy Hutchinson. Cassidy Hutchinson in the White House working under Mark Meadows, who can give the entire connect the dots for everything that happened leading up to and past Jan 6th involving Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, Secret Service, the ellipse, the speech, Donald Trump killing time in the dining room and letting those hours go by without doing a darn thing or calling in reinforcement for the outmatched Capitol Police and Metro Police. She can do all of that and has. And Mark Meadows is in quite a pickle because of it as well. That's Cassidy Hutchinson. Molly Michaels, who we just started talking about this week, in a way that we just started talking about Cassidy Hutchinson back on Jan 6th, was Donald Trump's chief administrative assistant, executive assistant. She ran the door. She was the gatekeeper to set the schedule for the president of the United States in the White House all the way through to the time he left office, and followed him to Mar-a-Lago and was involved with the moving of boxes at Mar-a-Lago, the hiding of boxes, and can testify credibly and will and has about Donald Trump's involvement, personal involvement in selecting the documents and hiding the documents from the National Archive, FBI, Department of Justice, and federal court order. That Molly Michaels, no longer working for Donald Trump, no longer having her legal bills paid for by Donald Trump. She, came out this week, is cooperating fully with Jack Smith. And I don't believe it's just Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, she's got the text messages and the emails back and forth with Walt Nauta, the butler valet guy who's been indicted with Donald Trump about moving the boxes, and she's got the photos of the boxes and all of that. But she can also testify about things leading up to Jan 6. The only gap in her testimony is, and I'm not making this up, Molly Michaels had personal errands to run or some appointment out of the White House on Jan 6th in the morning and missed the whole beginning of the insurrection and the attack on the Capitol. She came in later in the afternoon, but then she was there right through the end of the administration. She is a fly on the wall that I'm sure Jack Smith and Fani Willis are salivating to continue to get information from, and she is cooperating. You know who's missing from that long line of women who are pimping themselves out in Peter Navarro's attack? Molly Michaels. And I said on Legal AF, the leading podcast, Law and Politics, also on this network, MeidasTouch Network, just the other day, just on Saturday, watch Molly Michaels. She's unblemished. She's unimpeachable. She's a Girl Scout in that good sense in terms of testimony, and nobody so far has attacked her. Donald Trump came out right away on Cassidy Hutchinson. Don't remember, a lot of people running around, didn't really have a big job. You see Peter Navarro saying she was there sucking candy all the time and not having any real role. I don't think Mark Meadows, by the way, would agree with you, Mr. Navarro, since she worked for him, not for you. But so far, silence, eerie silence, deafening silence from Donald Trump and his proxies to go after Molly Michaels. It may start, or they're going to try to bribe her too, try to get her back inside the tent with offers of jobs and money and legal fees as Jack Smith continues to protect her as a witness that's important to the prosecution. Keep an eye on proxies for Donald Trump, like Peter Navarro, like Steve Bannon, like Rudy Giuliani, even though he's been indicted 13 times, and who they go after and who they don't, as we continue to try to put the pieces together. So the takeaway from this hot take, I hope, is that Peter Navarro, as I said, the second part of this is that he's done himself no favors, covered himself in no glory, as he awaits sentencing in January by Judge Mehta. Judge Mehta will be aware, one, because I'm sure he reads the paper. Two, because the federal government, the prosecutors, will make him aware of Peter Navarro's social media tweets and attacks on other people, including other witnesses in prosecutions that he is a potential witness in. Whether that is then brought to the attention of judges like Judge Chutkin, because they see this as a way to tamper with witnesses being led by Donald Trump, because Peter Navarro's legal fees are paid for by Donald Trump's Save America PAC, period. It's public. Millions of dollars of Peter Navarro for multiple lawyers have been paid for by Donald Trump. Peter Navarro has been bought and paid for by Donald Trump. So when you hear Peter Navarro speak, it's because Donald Trump told him to, or gave him permission to do, or told him to do it and gave him a note card with what he should say on it. And that, Jack Smith's going to have to consider whether Peter Navarro is just a mouthpiece to do indirectly what Donald Trump has been gagged from doing directly, including going after witnesses, right? Including even in the list of pimps for Peter Navarro includes Kellyanne Conway, of all people, who was a bigger supporter of Donald Trump at any given moment than his former, White House press aide, presidential advisor, Kellyanne Conway. And so, but she's made that list. This shows you what's going on in Donald Trump's mind, not Peter Navarro. He's a conduit for all this. He's gonna get his head handed to him in sentencing for doing this. And whatever is the highest number the Department of Justice is going to seek for sentencing, a few years, and he's going to push for, home confinement for a couple of months, is going to be on the high side. Peter Navarro acts like he's not worried. Even though it was reported while the jury returned its verdict, right, in about 4 hours, he was stroking his chin, listening to their verdict. And then he said right afterwards, well, if I have to go to jail for this, once and for all to resolve it, I will, but I don't think I'm going to have to. I got bad news for you, Peter Navarro. You've been wrong every time. You pinned your fortunes to Donald Trump. You're letting him use you as a proxy, as a hand puppet. And you know where Donald Trump's hand is right now. It's making Peter Navarro's mouth move. And the prosecutors are watching it, right? And they're watching the witness tampering and where you're attacking people like Cassidy Hutchinson, right? This is a person, by the way, Cassidy Hutchinson, who's already testified that she had real personal security issues about testifying on Jan 6 and had to have a security plan developed with the federal government in order to protect her. And this is the woman that Donald Trump has chosen to attack again and again to try to undermine her credibility with sexist, racist, misogynist statements. But keep an eye on who they're not attacking. When you hear the attack start on Molly Michaels, right? Trump's right-hand aide, who kept control of his schedule and knows the inner workings of the Oval Office and at Mar-a-Lago with the documents, then the worm is turned, and that's Donald Trump. We'll keep an eye on that and those kind of developments at that valuable piece of real estate that I occupy with my Legal AF co-anchors at the intersection of law and U.S. politics. We do it on hot takes like this one. We pull it all together during the week in a midweek edition of Legal AF. It's What You Think, the leading podcast on law and politics. We do it on Saturdays, another episode with Ben Meiselas and me. And if you like what I'm doing here, help with the ratings, keep me on the air, so to speak. Keep the content coming to you by giving me a thumbs up and leaving me a positive comment. And then until my next hot take, until my next episode of Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.